Master of Arts in Comparative Literature in Spain, in Salamanca, as I studied the mystic dimensions of the writings of the Cross and also St. Teresa Chicava. And part of my concern as I read this text is not really understanding only the dimensions of truth or the sacred aspect of how people read the Bible, but more on the human elements as to how the brain functions that give us a background for the way language is then spoken to us. Part of the methodology that I use is cognitive literary theory, also known as cognitive poetics, which is a blended of cognitive psychology, literary studies, to kind of push forward towards understanding how poetry and how writing are not simply ideas thought consciously, but are also affective expressions of the brain that are then structured through the grammar through which we write and think about the world. So, as I read those things and I explored those things, I thought about my own traditions and Adventists, and I thought about E.G. Wagner's supposed mystical elements in his writings, and how we think of his categories of the mystical, and then we think of orthodoxy in the church. So I'm then applying, again, cognitive literary theory, cognitive poetics, to understand how psychologically his own life experience then creates a groundwork that leads him into seeing the spirit in a particular way. So the evolution of E.J. Wagner's pneumatology, encapsulated in the Everlasting Covenant, has long possible religious scholars and historians. Known for his contributions to Adventist theology, Wagner's later work represents a notable departure from his early theological preoccupations, displaying an intensified emphasis on the Holy Spirit and a pronounced mystical dimension. This apparent shift has led some scholars to interpret his later writings as indicative of a fundamental change in theological orientation, attributed into a complex, perhaps conflicted, evolution of thought. However, such interpretations often overlook the subtleties within Wagner's work, particularly the consistent affective undercurrents and the presence of cognitive processes that shaped his theological imagination from early on. This paper reevaluates Wagner's later pneumatology by situating the Everlasting Covenant within the framework of cognitive literary theory and psychoanalytic inquiry, proposing that Wagner's mystical expressions of the Holy Spirit reflect not an abrupt shift, but a persistent cognitive, emotional disposition. By examining his use of symbolic presentation and affective language, this study argues that Wagner's engagement with mystical elements stemmed from a lifelong inclination towards unity and absorption within the divine. In doing so, this analysis challenges previous assessments of Wagner's theology as a fragmented or conflicted, suggesting that his approach to theology exemplifies the coherence and integrative potential inherent in a cognitive literary reading of theological texts. So, applying cognitive literary theory to theological studies provides a powerful lens for examining how authors construct and communicate complex ideas through emotional and symbolic means. Cognitive literary theory, which focuses on the mental processes involved in reading and interpreting texts, highlights the interplay of emotion, imagery, and conceptual frameworks that enable readers to experience theological ideas on a visceral level. For a writer like Wagner, whose work oscillates between doctrinal rigor and mystical immersion, cognitive literary analysis illuminates the layers of affect and interpretation that undergird his spiritual vision. In the Everlasting Covenant, Wagner's descriptions of the Holy Spirit reveal a theological principle and a means of inviting readers to experience divine unity, a process best understood through the cognitive emotional dynamics that cognitive literary theories bring to life. Towards the end of his life, Wagner writes, "In the world to come, we shall have spiritual bodies," quoted in 1 Corinthians, "so that we shall be able to see spiritual things, even the Spirit of God, as plainly as we now see men and trees and brooks on this earth. God's Spirit, God's life will be visible, flowing forth from the throne in a never-ending stream. Wherever on the new earth a man finds even the tiniest dripping rill, he will know that it is one of the ramifications of the river of life, and that if he follows up, it will bring him face to face with God on his throne." Wagner's treatment of the Holy Spirit in this quote is marked by a language that emphasizes integration and interconnectedness, suggesting a perception of the divine that transcends the boundaries of conventional doctrinal categories. Rather than presenting a doctrinal shift towards the mystic or as a philosophical or theological position, Wagner's language and imagery in the Everlasting Covenant reflect a consistent affective disposition that aligns with mystical thought. Terms like indwelling and unity in the way he uses them permeate his work, creating a lexicon of spiritual absorption that cognitive literary theory identifies as instrumental in understanding his thought. Wagner's work invites a participatory reading experience in which doctrinal understandings and personal spirituality converge. This subtle cognitive layering reveals that Wagner's mystic approaches is less a shift and a more inherent quality of his spiritual and cognitive approach to theology. Additionally, Wagner's symbolic representations play a critical role in constructing a theology that resonates emotionally and intellectually with his readers. Cognitive literary theory sheds light on how symbols function not merely as theological shorthand, but as cognitive anchors that shape our interpretive frameworks and emotional responses. In the Everlasting Covenant, Wagner employs symbols of light, water, and breath, common in biblical and mystical traditions, as cognitive tools that evoke a sense of divine immanence. These symbols, laden with effective power, help readers to experience the holy presence. By engaging with these symbols, Wagner's readers are drawn into a mode of understanding that transcends rational comprehension, allowing for a fuller cognitive and emotional experience of divine unity. So as I'm writing this, I'm thinking about several authors. For instance, in Gen of the Cross has this wonderful book called, I believe it's called in English, it's translated as The Fire of God. And the writing starts with the metaphor of this river that is a spirit and is God and then becomes a fire. But they also have a very essential and erotic element as he's writing about it. So curiously enough, if you read a lot of these mystic writings, but also other forms of theological thinking that have that terms of union in it, you'll find metaphors of water and fire being used very heavily so. And I think the quote we read before by Ellen White, I think is also a very good example of that thinking, going into when we think about unity and absorption and how we delineate that unity. How far do we go when we think of unity with the divine? If we think of nature, fire, and even water as symbols. Psychoanalytic theory further enhances our understanding of Wagner's mystical expression by revealing the psychological mechanisms behind his depiction of the Holy Spirit. From a psychoanalytic perspective, Wagner's focus on unity and absorption manifests an underlying desire for wholeness, a yearning to dissolve individual boundaries within the divine. This interpretive lens suggests that Wagner's theology reflects not an external doctrinal shift, but an internal emotional trajectory, where the themes of integration and absorption serve as responses to fundamental psychological needs. Such an approach provides insight into the affective drivers behind Wagner's pneumatology, supporting the argument that his mystical inclinations were not an abrupt development, but a part of a coherent, lifelong spiritual journey. As part of the footnote here in this part as well, as I'm writing this, I'm thinking of Woodrow Wilson's biography of Wagner, where he makes the groundbreaking claim that Wagner's ideas of the mystic, again, are not exactly new at the end of his life, but are part of a journey that he went through. However, the difference between my thought and Woodrow's thought is that I do not see it as a change later in life, but rather as a life disposition. Interestingly so, the Everlasting Covenant starts with an ecstatic experience. He is listening to a sermon, and he gets, all of a sudden, the room turns white, and he sees the cross, and Jesus crucified in front of him. So Woodrow's reading of that experience is a good thing, right? He is convicted of the cross, convicted of God, and now he is led to become a minister of sorts, a lay minister initially, and then someone who is part of thinking of God in this particular way. However, again, in my reading, I'm seeing this not as the one good moment and then the one bad moment of his theology, but more this man has had a journey where he sees God in this absorptionary elements and connections because of his life experience and against his psychological needs. Together, cognitive literary studies of psychoanalytic theory offer a compelling interpretation of Wagner's pneumatology as both intellectually and emotionally integrated. By considering his writings through the mental processes involved in reading, this approach underscores how Wagner's language and imagery elicit a profound, affective response to others. This integrated view presents Wagner's mysticism not as a fragmented or conflicted element of his theology, but as an expression of a deep-seated cognitive and emotional disposition towards the divine. Through cognitive literary analysis, we can appreciate how Wagner's theological imagination and mystical vocabulary separate parts of his later work, but central to his enduring vision is spiritual unity and divine presence. Wagner frequently employed the image of fire to represent the Holy Spirit, aligning with St. John the Cross's flame of love. Both theologians depict divine love as purifying, containing the fire that transcends ordinary perception and burns away self-centeredness. For Wagner, the Holy Spirit's fire is both warming and consuming, drawing the believer into a process of sanctification and self-surrender that dissolves the ego, allowing divine unity to be realized within the believer's soul. In addition to fire, Wagner describes the Spirit's work as akin to a flowing stream, washing over the believer and cleansing the spirit. This aligns with the medieval mystic Marguerite Porete, whose metaphor of the mirror of simple souls, who got or killed, envisions divine love as a reflective, fluid presence that immerses the soul in God's essence. Wagner's Holy Spirit similarly washes away sin, ego, and division, preparing the believer for a union where personal boundaries dissolve. A hallmark of Wagner's theology is the Holy Spirit's active presence within the world and individual souls. Rather than being a distant force, the Spirit's presence is experienced as an immanent reality that fills and transcends human limitations. Like the fire and water metaphors, this immanence represents God's closeness, drawing believers towards divine love and unity with God, eroding the separation between the human and the divine. St. John describes divine love as a fire that leaves no room for anything but love itself, consuming individual desires until only God's will remains. Wagner's thematology resonates with this view as he describes the Spirit's work as fostering a form of selflessness where personal aspirations are absorbed into the will of God. The sacrificial aspect of divine love leads the believer to experience a complete giving over of the self, guided by the Spirit towards ultimate unity with God. So to conclude, going all the way to the end, Wagner's thematology reflects a profound mystical vision in which the Holy Spirit is the ultimate bridge between humanity and the divine. Through the metaphors of fire and water, he paints the Spirit as a purifying, unifying presence that consumes, cleanses, and fills the believer, fostering a love that transcends personal limitations. This unity, which mirrors the mystical sensibilities of St. John the Cross and Marguerite Porete, emphasizes a complete surrender of the self to the divine. For Wagner, the Holy Spirit is not simply a divine guide, it is the active presence of God's love within, leading the believer into a transformative union that erases the boundary between the self and God. Through the Spirit, Wagner envisions a life imbued with divine immanence where love, holiness, and unity with God are not distant ideals, but realized truths in the soul's journey towards the divine.